Then, our first reading for the morning is a poem, which I was going to read to you, and then I discovered that some young adult during the pandemic, made a video version of this poem as a kind of a pandemic project. It won some kind of award. It was lovely. And then it turns out that our projector doesn't work. So fortunately, I still wrote down the poem so that I have it here and can read it to you. So I will share the video link at some point after today. I'll put it on our Facebook page and maybe send it out in a church email, just in case anyone wants to see what a young adult does with this by way of making a video of it. But the poem is by David Hernandez, and it is called Sincerely the Sky. Imagining the sky addressing us. Yes, I see you down there, looking up into my vastness. What are you hoping to find on my vacant face, there between the crisscross of telephone wires? You should know I am only bright blue now because of physics. Molecules break and scatter my light from the sun more than any other color. You know my variations. Azure at noon, navy by midnight. How often I find you then on your patio, pajamaed and distressed, head thrown back so your eyes can pick apart not the darker version of myself, but the carousel of stars. To you, I am merely background. You barely hear my voice. Remember, I am most vibrant when air breaks my light. Do something with your brokenness. Our assigned gospel reading for the day comes from Matthew, and I've backed up a little bit because it felt like it needed a little more context from where it started. And then I realized it still starts in the middle of things by saying, and as they went away. And you don't know who they were or where they were going away from. So the setup was that John the Baptist had been arrested by Herod. He was in prison, and he was hearing these things about Jesus. So he sent some of his followers to ask Jesus, are you the chosen one with a special message from God that we're waiting for? Or are we looking for someone else? So that was the setup to this. And then as they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John the Baptist. He said, what did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? No. So what did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? No, people who dress in soft robes are in royal palaces. So what did you go out into the wilderness to see? A prophet? Yes. I tell you, more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare the way before you. Truly, I tell you, among those born of women, human beings, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. And yet, the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and the violent take it by force. If you need a contemporary image, just think about January 6, 2020, or 2020, whatever year that was. Whatever. Time is blending. 2021, thank you. The violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John came. If you're willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. Let anyone with ears listen. But to what will I compare this generation? It's like children sitting in the marketplaces calling out to one another, we played the flute for you and you did not dance. We wailed and you did not mourn. John came neither eating nor drinking, so they said, he has a demon. The human one came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Then the assigned portion of the reading skips over a few verses where Jesus has mean things, or he chastises the cities where he started his ministry for not paying enough attention. But he says there are some other cities on the outskirts of those that paid way more attention, and so he praises them. Then he talks about his special and direct relationship to God, and then he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." That's the assigned reading, with a little bit added. Sometime in late 1955, a 24-year-old musician named David Amram was playing in a New York City club with Charles Mingus's band. He was playing French horn in a jazz band. And yes, this is a jazz story, and I hear your eyes rolling all the way from here. But stick with me. I'm not going to make you listen to the music. Oh, you should listen to the music. Absolutely should listen to the music. My summer reading tends to be novels and jazz biographies, so they bleed into what I think about when I'm preaching. Anyhow, David Amram was playing in this club in 1955 when one of his musical heroes walks in, the pianist Thelonious Monk, a.k.a. the High Priest of Bop. Amram was too terrified to introduce himself, but after the set, the drummer leaned over to him and says, "Hey, Monk wants to meet you." So he went over to where Monk was sitting, and they got acquainted. He says Monk asked for his address and then pulled out this address book that had papers pointing out from it in all directions. He said, "I have no idea how he will ever find my address in here again." But it wasn't very long after that Monk invited himself over to Amram's apartment, and they visited for hours, talking together and playing music, and it was the start of both a mentorship and a friendship, with Monk taking the younger musician under his wing, sometimes with surprising lessons, like this one that Amram recalled later in his life. He says, "I was listening one time with Monk at his house, and he had on the radio, I don't know what station it was, but for some reason they were playing some kind of country music. And it kept, see, I don't just talk about jazz, it's country music, right? And it kept going on. And finally I said, "Thelonious, do you like this kind of music too?" He paused for a minute, and then he said, "Listen to the drummer." So I was quiet for about 10 minutes while they played 2 or 3 more songs, and then he turned and said to me, "Check out his brushwork." The drummer was playing with brushes instead of drumsticks. It was a more delicate sound. He said, "So I listened as hard as I could to that little radio with a bit of static, and somehow I could hear something. So I realized, of course, that what he was trying to tell me was, first of all, don't be judgmental of anyone else. Just listen and pay attention for the beauty. And then when you find the beauty, study that and don't bother with the rest of it. Look for the beauty. And when you find the beauty, study it and don't bother with the rest." Is he talking about music, or is he talking about, I don't know, everything? Where is the beauty in your life? And when you find, and can you find beauty? Something beautiful in places and situations where you wouldn't normally expect it? And are there practices or habits that help you listen for and look for and experience the beauty of the everyday, whatever is held in the everyday? A jazz musician listening to country music. We live in a time of dissatisfaction, which is not news to any of us here. I know that dissatisfaction is what powers our economy. It's magnified across and inside our social media platforms and practices. Dissatisfaction couched as outrage is the primary currency of our politics these days. It's not news to us, but neither is it new. 2,500 years ago, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, named dissatisfaction as the bedrock of human existence, a grasping for that which we cannot hold, an attempt to avoid that which we cannot avoid, a refusal to accept that the one constant law is change. So dissatisfaction. And Jesus laid his finger on the pulse of that as well in the assigned reading. He used the image of children playing in games in the marketplace to diagnose the impossible task of being a prophet. The prophet aims to stir people out of complacency, who would rather complain about things than do the interior work of reflection that leads to the outer work of change. We play the sad songs, but you won't accept the sorrow. So we play the happy songs, but you won't embrace joy. The Goldilocks generation, he might have called it, if he knew anything about 19th century English folktales. I don't know. Maybe that's a theological claim, I suppose. I don't know. Well, he said this generation, mostly he was talking about religious people, influencers and leaders who didn't want their own positions destabilized. John the Baptist came along trying to wake people up to a sense of God's presence, but they didn't like the way that he did it. Always on about the gloom and the doom, wearing those uncomfortable clothes and eating that nasty diet, locusts and wild honey. Nasty, well, and yummy, but who wants to deal with all the bees it takes to get to those wild honey, particularly those of us with bee allergies? No, thank you. So Jesus comes along with a stronger note of joy in his music. Check out his brushwork. But the Goldilocks generation was immune to the beauty. They didn't want the joy in the step because the dance partners who might get involved, those unsavory tax collectors and sinners, the wrong kind of people get mixed up in this. John came not eating and not drinking, living an ascetic life and denying himself things that feel normal, that everybody wants. And so they said, well, he's got a demon. He's doing this wrong. Jesus came eating and drinking, but with the wrong kind of people. So they said he's a glutton and a drunkard. It's the prophet's catch-22. The critics are so satisfied with their dissatisfaction that they'd rather stay with the blah that they know instead of taking the risk of finding beauty somewhere in everything. Joy, in your climate justice work, you probably know all about that, people being so satisfied with their dissatisfaction. We'd rather know it's a problem out there, but we can't do anything about it, right? The pastor and the writer, Brian Hortall, tells a story of starting a job in a new congregation where, in his kind of getting to know people phase, a longtime member told him her harrowing story. She had an experience in what I guess was her middle adulthood. It was a hellish stretch in which her husband died, then her son was incarcerated for drug possession, and then her daughter died by suicide within a stretch of 2 years. So she told him that she had been drowning in her grief, that she was despairing about an empty future. When the pastor at the time told her something that, I'll be honest, I cannot imagine ever saying to anyone in these circumstances. It feels like potential pastoral malpractice to me. But what he said to her was, thank God every day, even and especially when you can scarcely find a reason to do so. It was advice that was so outrageous under the circumstances that she decided to go ahead and give it a try. And she said that many days she just couldn't do it. She would sit there and try as hard as she could, and there would be no thankfulness that came to her. But she kept on trying, and eventually she turned it into a daily habit that gave her something that felt like strength and hope and even joy, which is not to say still that it's any advice I would ever give to anyone who'd been through that many losses. I'm just going to live under the assumption that the pastor knew her well enough to expect that she could take that as it was offered. Yeah, I do think that there is something to be said for that advice in the right circumstances. And maybe really it's echoed in everything that we've read this morning. In the midst of a Goldilocks generation, which is dissatisfied with its dissatisfaction, which is pretty much every generation in its own way. Listen to the brushwork. Find the beauty. Study it. And don't bother with the rest. Look at the sky. Remember that it's most vibrant when air breaks its light. Do something with your brokenness. Come to me, all you who are weary and bearing heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke on you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light, which is to say, love God, love people, and everything else is extra. This is God's good news. Amen.